you figured the first day would be like, Murph?
Somewhat.
Relax. Get through the first 3 or 4 days, you'll be just like the rest of us. That's what it means to be a veteran. You're scared all the time.
I didn't notice you being too scared, just crazy, standing up like that.
I'd take care of you, didn't I?
Some men played heroes. These men were actual heroes. The difference isn't in the script. It's in the scars, the medals, the prison time, and the mountains of pain they climbed before the cameras ever rolled. Hollywood has given us legends, but not all legends are equal. The men on this list didn't just portray toughness. They were toughness, carved from Depression-era poverty, World War battlefields, coal mines, and street corners where weakness got you killed. We're counting down the 11 toughest actors in Hollywood history. Not the most decorated, not the highest paid, the ones who were genuinely, authentically, undeniably hard as iron. Before we start, drop a comment right now and tell us, which actor from classic Hollywood would you least want to face in a real fight? Keep that name in mind, because by the end of this video, your answer might change completely. Number 11, Victor Mature, refused a country club membership for being an actor, responded by saying he agreed. He was not an actor and had 72 films to prove it. Brawled his way through real Louisville street gangs before ever stepping onto a set. Built like a dock worker, moved like a prize fighter. Victor Mature's self-deprecating humor was armor. Underneath, it was a man who genuinely didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Mature was born in 1913 in Louisville, Kentucky. His father, Marcellus, was a scissors grinder who worked with his hands every day of his life. Victor absorbed that blue-collar ethic completely. He didn't grow up dreaming of Hollywood. He grew up working, fighting, and surviving. Louisville in the 1920s and 1930s was rough territory. Mature navigated it the hard way. By the time he arrived in California, he had the calloused hands and iron posture of a man who'd actually labored. Directors cast Mature in physical roles because he inhabited them naturally. In Samson and Delilah, he didn't mind pushing over temple columns. He strained against real weight. His body wasn't sculpted in a gym for the camera. It was built by life. Co-stars noted he moved with genuine physical authority, not performance, habit. During the filming of My Darling Clementine in 1946, a stunt sequence required Mature to be restrained and roughed up. The stunt coordinator briefed the extras on how to look like they were manhandling him. Mature listened, then quietly said, "Don't look like it. Do it." The extras hesitated. Mature told them again. The scene was shot in one take. Director John Ford, a man not known for handing out compliments, nodded once and moved on. That was the highest praise Ford gave anyone. Cecil B. DeMille, who directed Mature in Samson and Delilah, put it plainly. He has the physical presence of a man who has never needed to ask for anything. It comes off the screen like a force of nature. Victor Mature spent his career laughing at himself. He called himself a big ham with a big bag of ham tricks. But the directors who worked with him knew what they had. A man with real weight behind every move. That kind of thing cannot be manufactured. You either have it or you don't. Mature had it from birth. Number 10, Ernest Borgnine, United States Navy veteran. 10 years of active military service. Fought in World War II aboard destroyer escorts in the Atlantic. Didn't start acting until he was 34 years old. Built his entire career on the foundation of a decade of genuine service and hard physical work. Ernest Borgnine didn't look like a movie star. He looked like the toughest man in whatever room he walked into. That was never an accident. Borgnine was born Erms Efren Borgnino in Hamden, Connecticut in 1917, the son of Italian immigrants. His childhood was shaped by the rhythms of working-class New England. When he graduated high school, there were no film school dreams. He joined the Navy. He served from 1935 to 1941, came home, then re-enlisted immediately after Pearl Harbor. He spent the entire war at sea, running convoy escort duty in the brutal North Atlantic, some of the most dangerous naval work of the entire conflict. Borgnine came to acting after the war, studying on the GI Bill. But he brought 10 years of military discipline to every role. When he played Fatso Judson, one of the most genuinely menacing villains in Hollywood history. And from here to eternity in 1953, he didn't need acting techniques. He pulled from real authority, real command, real understanding of how dangerous men actually behave. When Borgnine won the Academy Award for Best Actor for Marty in 1956, the Hollywood establishment was stunned, not by the quality of his performance, but by the idea that a man who looked like Borgnine could carry a film on tenderness alone. But that was the full picture of Borgnine, a man genuinely tough enough to be gentle. He reportedly wept backstage after accepting the Oscar, thinking of his mother. Then he went back out and shook every hand in the room. That combination, iron and warmth, was entirely authentic. Director Robert Aldrich, who worked with Borgnine on The Dirty Dozen, said, "Ernie was the real thing." The men in that cast who had military backgrounds, Lee Marvin, Telly Savalas, they all deferred to him without a word being said. That tells you everything. Ernest Borgnine served his country for a decade before he ever read a script. His toughness wasn't theatrical. It was institutional, forged in the Atlantic Ocean, in fog and cold and genuine danger. Hollywood just gave a frame. Number 9, Burt Lancaster, professional circus acrobat, performed on trapeze circuits across America through the Great Depression. Physical conditioning so extreme that studio doctors called it medically unusual. Military service in World War II. Career so physically demanding that he performed stunts into his 60s that professional stuntmen declined. Burt Lancaster's body was a precision instrument built by years of genuine physical danger. Every stunt he performed on screen was easy by comparison. Lancaster grew up in East Harlem, New York. Tough neighborhood, tougher times. He earned an athletic scholarship to NYU, but dropped out during the Depression to join the circus. Not as a performer in the easy sense, as an acrobat. He and his partner Nick Cravat performed on trapeze rigs across the country for years. No nets, no insurance, no safety protocols worth the name. Falls happened. Lancaster took them and got back up. When Lancaster got into films, his debut came in 1946 with The Killers. Directors immediately recognized something different. He didn't move like an actor. He moved like an athlete. His screen fights were choreographed differently because he could actually do the movements. For The Crimson Pirate in 1952, he and Cravat performed full circus-level acrobatics on a moving ship set. The production insurance company nearly refused to cover the shoot. During the filming of Trapeze in 1956, a pivotal high-wire sequence required a genuine catch at extreme height. The professional circus performers on set were offering Lancaster technical guidance. He listened politely, then did the sequence without a double. The circus performers, men who had performed their entire lives, watched in silence. One of them told the production crew afterward, "He has better hands than most men I have worked with for 20 years. Coming from a professional acrobat, that was not a compliment lightly given. Director John Frankenheimer, who made Birdman of Alcatraz and 7 Days in May with Lancaster, observed, "When you work with Burt, you understand very quickly that the physical vocabulary most actors work to develop he already had. Completely. From the ground up. It was in his bones." Burt Lancaster arrived in Hollywood having already survived a decade of genuine physical risk. The stunts Hollywood asked of him were simply Tuesday. He performed them with the casual efficiency of a man who had done harder things before breakfast. That is not something a trainer or a coach produces. That is a life. Number 8, James Coburn, United States Army veteran. Studied with acting coach Stella Adler, but relied entirely on physical presence he'd honed years before any class. Suffered crippling rheumatoid arthritis that deformed his hands so severely he could barely hold objects, yet continued performing. Fought back through alternative medicine when conventional doctors gave up on him. Returned to full physical capacity through sheer refusal to quit. James Coburn moved through the world like a man who had been given an extra set of nerves, all of them tuned for danger. He didn't act loose and dangerous. He was loose and dangerous. Coburn grew up in Compton, California, a city that has never been gentle. His father was a mechanic. Practical, physical, no-nonsense work. Coburn absorbed the same ethic. He was tall, angular, and naturally intimidating by his late teens. When he served in the Army, the physicality deepened. The economy of movement that would become his signature on screen came from environments where unnecessary motion attracted the wrong attention. Coburn broke through in The Magnificent Seven in 1960, notable for the fact that he had almost no dialogue. He communicated entirely through how he stood, moved, and threw a knife. It was a revelation. Directors realized quickly that Coburn didn't need words to fill a frame. His physical presence did it. That is an extraordinarily rare quality that no acting class teaches. You either have that kind of charged stillness or you don't. The rheumatoid arthritis that began attacking Coburn's body in the 1970s was genuinely brutal. His hands became so deformed that he could not make a fist. He lost roles. He was in constant pain. Conventional medicine offered limited options. Coburn refused to accept that diagnosis as final. He pursued an aggressive regimen of alternative treatments, sulfur supplements, dietary overhaul, and physical discipline that bordered on punishment. By the early 1990s, he had largely recovered. In 1998, he won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for Affliction. He held that Oscar in hands that doctors had once told him would never function normally again. Steve McQueen, who starred alongside Coburn in both The Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape, said simply, "Coburn is the only man I ever worked with where I thought he might actually be faster than me. And I don't say that about many people." James Coburn spent years fighting his own body the way he'd spent his career making audiences believe he could fight anyone in front of him. He won both battles. That is the definition of the toughness this list was built to honor. Number 7, Richard Widmark. Rejected from military service in World War II due to a perforated eardrum, a source of genuine shame he carried for years. Channeled that frustration into creating the most genuinely unnerving screen villains of the 1940s. Researched his roles by spending time with actual criminals and law enforcement. Never used a stunt double for physical sequences until well into his 60s. Richard Widmark's screen menace was so convincing because it wasn't performed. It was distilled. He bottled something real and poured it into every frame. Widmark was born in Sunrise Township, Minnesota in 1914. His family moved frequently, South Dakota, Illinois, chasing work across the Plains states during lean years. He was a scholarship student, academically sharp, physically capable. He wanted to serve in the war and was turned away by the Army. That rejection drove him harder than most rejections drive men. He arrived in Hollywood with something to prove that had nothing to do with fame. His debut in Kiss of Death in 1947 introduced audiences to Tommy Udo, a giggling, sadistic killer who pushed an old woman in a wheelchair down a staircase. Audiences were genuinely disturbed, not because of the scene's staging, but because of what Widmark's eyes communicated. There was no safety in those eyes, no reassurance that this was just a movie. Directors who worked with him early said he brought something from inside that they couldn't name and didn't want to examine too closely. Preparing for his role in Pickup on South Street in 1953, Widmark requested access to actual pickpockets and street criminals through a contact at the New York Police Department. He spent 2 weeks studying their movement patterns, their methods of distraction, and, most importantly, their psychology. Director Sam Fuller watched Widmark work and later recalled, "He came back from those 2 weeks a different man on screen. He knew things about that world that no actor should probably know, but it was all on film and it was extraordinary." Henry Hathaway, who directed Widmark in several films, said, "Richard did his homework the way a detective does his homework. He went to the source. He found the real thing and he brought it back. That's why you believed every word out of his mouth, no matter how dark it was." Richard Widmark was rejected from the war that defined his generation. He turned that wound into fuel. He spent the next 40 years making audiences believe he was the most dangerous man in any room. The men who actually knew dangerous men confirmed it came off as genuine. That is its own kind of honor. Number 6, Sterling Hayden. Merchant Marine sailor before age 20. Ran guns for the Yugoslav partisans during World War II under OSS orders. Parachuted behind enemy lines into occupied Yugoslavia. Awarded the Silver Star. Later became a deep water sailing captain, crossing oceans alone. called Hollywood a dream factory full of comfortable lies, and escaped at every chance he got. Sterling Hayden was the only man in Hollywood history who was more interesting than his films. His real life made his screen performances look like mild afternoons. Hayden was born in Montclair, New Jersey in 1916, and the sea claimed him early. By 17, he was working on fishing boats out of Gloucester, Massachusetts. By 20, he was a professional sailor with blue water experience that most men never accumulate in a lifetime. He was physically enormous, 6 feet 5 inches, broad-shouldered, hands like hawsers. He could navigate by stars, handle a gale, and manage a crew in crisis. Hollywood noticed the face and the frame. They had no idea what was behind them. Hayden accepted studio contracts as a way to fund his sailing. He was transparent about his contempt for most of what Hollywood produced, including his own work. But when directors needed someone who looked like genuine danger, as Stanley Kubrick did when casting The Killing in 1956, and as John Huston did for The Asphalt Jungle in 1950, Hayden delivered something no ordinary actor could replicate. He brought the silence of a man comfortable with genuine risk. Audiences felt it without understanding why. In 1959, Hayden violated a court order, took his 4 children, and sailed from San Francisco to Tahiti on a schooner named the Wanderer. He had no legal permission. He had no certain destination beyond the ocean. He faced contempt of court charges on his return. He didn't particularly care. He wrote about the voyage in his memoir, calling it the only fully honest thing he'd done in years. The sailing community considered the passage a genuine achievement. A federal judge considered it a crime. Hayden considered both assessments fair. Director Stanley Kubrick, after completing The Killing, said, "Sterling operates at a frequency that most actors don't have access to. He has genuinely been in danger. Real danger, not manufactured danger. The screen knows the difference, and so does the audience." Sterling Hayden used Hollywood to fund a life that Hollywood could never contain. He ran guns in wartime. He sailed oceans alone. He parachuted into occupied Europe. When he stood in front of a camera, he was simply passing time between real adventures. That is not a pose. That is a life lived at a level most men only read about. Number 5, Robert Ryan, Dartmouth College boxing champion, United States Marine Corps veteran, amateur heavyweight title contender, spent time in the toughest gyms in New York and Chicago before acting classes, built a screen career on genuine athletic dominance that he almost never spoke about publicly, directed to play villains, because he was the only actor studios trusted to be genuinely frightening. Robert Ryan was the most feared man in any gym he walked into, and the most underrated man in any film he appeared in. Both facts were connected. Ryan was born in Chicago in 1909 into a comfortable Irish Catholic family. He was educated, articulate, and large, 6 feet 4 inches with a boxer's build. He won the heavyweight boxing championship at Dartmouth in 4 consecutive years. Not intramural competition, actual collegiate boxing, where the men across the ring were serious athletes. When he enlisted in the Marines in World War II, the Corps already had a genuine fighter on their hands. Ryan trained Marines in boxing and physical conditioning. He was the man who taught tough men how to be tougher. Ryan arrived in Hollywood after the war with no interest in the industry's social machinery. He acted because it was work. Directors cast him as villains and heavies because his physical authority was absolute. In the setup in 1949, he played a washed-up boxer in a film that required him to appear in an actual ring, in actual fights with the camera close. Ryan moved like a boxer because he was one. Boxing choreographers on the film had almost nothing to teach him. They mostly stayed out of his way. During production on Bad Day at Black Rock in 1955, in which Ryan played the primary antagonist against Spencer Tracy, the production required a confrontation scene where Ryan's character physically intimidates Tracy's one-armed veteran. On the day of filming, Tracy arrived on set visibly nervous about the sequence. Ryan, who had done nothing to provoke that nervousness, simply sat down next to Tracy before the scene and said quietly, "I'm going to come at you full. Don't step back. Hold your ground." Tracy held his ground. The scene is considered one of the finest confrontations in 1950 cinema. Ryan's threat read as completely authentic because it was. Director Edward Dmytryk, after completing Crossfire with Ryan, wrote in his memoir, "Bob Ryan was the most genuinely dangerous-feeling man I worked with in 40 years of filmmaking. Not aggressive, not loud, just dangerous. The kind of dangerous that comes from actually having been in situations where danger was real." Robert Ryan spent his career being cast as the man other men feared. Directors didn't cast him that way because of how he looked. They cast him that way because of how he moved, how he stood, and what happened in a room when he walked into it. 4 Dartmouth heavyweight titles and a Marine Corps tour will do that to a man. And it shows. Number 4, Charlton Heston, United States Army Air Forces veteran. Aerial gunner on B, 25 bombers in the Alaskan theater. Performed through torn ligaments without halting production. Continued physically demanding roles after cancer surgery and lung removal. One of 220 cast and crew members who developed cancer after filming The Conqueror near a nuclear test site in Utah. Never stopped working. Never complained publicly. Charlton Heston brought genuine military discipline and almost defiant physical endurance to every role he played. He didn't portray strength. He was it. Heston was born in Evanston, Illinois in 1923. He grew up partly in the wilderness of northern Michigan, which gave him the self-sufficiency of a man comfortable with hard physical environments. He won a drama scholarship to Northwestern University, but World War II interrupted. He served as a radio operator and aerial gunner on B, 25 bombers in the Alaskan theater, cold, brutal, high-altitude work. He came home with the bearing of a military man and never entirely lost it. Heston's physical stature and military bearing made him the natural choice for roles requiring genuine gravitas. But what separated him from other large, impressive actors was his absolute refusal to accept limitation. For the 10 Commandments in 1956, he insisted on personally handling actual stone tablets through hundreds of takes, his shoulders shredded by the repetition. For Ben-Hur in 1959, he trained for months with professional charioteers and performed the majority of the race himself. The chariot sequence is still considered one of the most dangerous filming achievements in Hollywood history. During production of the greatest story ever told in 1965, Heston tore the ligaments in his shoulder performing a scene. The injury was severe enough that most actors would have halted filming immediately. Heston had the shoulder strap during the lunch break. He did not inform the director, George Stevens, of the injury until the day's work was complete. Stevens later said he had noticed something different in Heston's movement that afternoon, but assumed it was characterization. It was pain management. Heston had simply decided the production was more important than his discomfort. That decision cost him months of recovery afterward. He made it without hesitation. Director William Wyler, who worked with Heston on Ben-Hur, said, "Chuck has something I have seen in very few actors in my career. A complete unwillingness to admit that his body has limits. Most men performing what he performed in that chariot sequence would have been in hospital. He thought it was Tuesday. Charlton Heston received cancer from a film set and kept working. He tore ligaments and kept filming. He had a lung removed and returned to physically demanding roles. That is not stubbornness. That is a moral code. The code of a man who took duty seriously, whether the duty was to his country or to his craft. Hollywood rarely produces that. The Army sometimes does. Number 3, Lee Marvin, United States Marine Corps. Pacific Theater combat veteran. Purple Heart recipient. Machine gun fire through the back at the Battle of Saipan. Severed sciatic nerve. Permanent limp disguised on screen for decades. Witnessed the deaths of most of his platoon. Never fully left the war behind. His screen menace was not performance. It was memory. Lee Marvin moved through film sets the way he moved through the Pacific, with the quiet, efficient awareness of a man who understood that real violence is not theatrical. It is ugly, sudden, and final. Marvin was born in New York City in 1924. He enlisted in the Marines at 17, trained as a scout sniper, and was deployed to the Pacific. He served in the Marshall Islands and fought at Saipan, one of the bloodiest Marine engagements of the Pacific War. 60% of his platoon were killed or wounded. At Saipan, a Japanese machine gun hit him in the back, severing his sciatic nerve and leaving him partially paralyzed. He spent 13 months in military hospitals recovering. He came home permanently altered. Marvin came to acting through the GI Bill. He was straightforward about why the war shaped his performances. He didn't need to imagine danger because he remembered it in his body. Directors noticed that he moved differently than other actors. His screen fights lacked the exaggerated quality of theatrical combat. It looked like a man who understood what actual physical confrontation costs. For Point Blank in 1967, director John Boorman built the entire film around Marvin's particular movement vocabulary, deliberate, economical, and genuinely threatening. During location filming in Oregon for a 1960s production, Marvin got into a serious altercation at a local bar with several lumberjacks who made the mistake of testing him. Witnesses reported that Marvin handled multiple men efficiently and without apparent alarm. He showed up on set the following morning with bruised knuckles and a cut above one eye. He told the director he'd walked into a door. He went to makeup, covered what he could, and worked the full day. No delay, no drama, no explanation beyond the door story, which no one believed and no one pressed. That was Marvin, real, contained, and entirely without theater. Director John Boorman, after completing Point Blank with Marvin, wrote, "Lee brought something to that film that I could not have scripted or directed. He brought the memory of actual combat into every scene. You cannot manufacture that. The camera finds it and the audience feels it without knowing why." Lee Marvin fought through one of the most brutal Marine campaigns of World War II, took a machine gun round in the back, and walked out carrying scars he wore under every costume for the rest of his career. When he played dangerous men on screen, he wasn't imagining anything. He was simply remembering. That is the rarest and most unnerving quality an actor can possess. Number 2, Kirk Douglas. Born into destitute immigrant poverty. Wrestling scholarship champion. United States Navy combat veteran. Survived a helicopter crash that killed 2 others. Survived a stroke that destroyed his speech. Fought back from both. Published a book about recovery at age 79. Lived to 103. Every single year of it forward, Kirk Douglas was not defined by what he could do when healthy. He was defined by what he refused to stop doing when broken. That is a different and rarer kind of toughness entirely. Douglas was born Isert Danielovich in Amsterdam, New York in 1916, the son of Russian Jewish immigrants. His father was a ragman. There were 7 children and genuine poverty, the kind where meals were uncertain and heat was optional. Douglas worked from childhood, selling newspapers, doing any labor available. He clawed his way into college through competitive wrestling, not amateur, performed for appearance wrestling, but brutal collegiate competition where strength and pain tolerance are the only currency. He earned his scholarship one match at a time. Douglas enlisted in the Navy after Pearl Harbor, was injured in service, and was medically discharged in 1944. He returned to acting with the physical conviction of a man accustomed to using his body as a tool. For Spartacus in 1960, which he also produced, he trained with actual fighters and refused stunt doubles for combat sequences. For Lonely Are the Brave in 1962, he performed his own horse work and took legitimate falls. Directors trusted him with physically demanding sequences because he had a documented history of delivering them without complaint. In 1991, Douglas survived a helicopter crash near his estate in Santa Barbara. 2 other passengers died in the crash. Douglas, then 74 years old, walked away. Most men that age would have spent months in recovery and called it finished. Douglas was back in public within weeks. Then, in 1996, he suffered a severe stroke that wiped out most of his ability to speak. He spent years in grueling speech therapy. He documented the humiliation and frustration of relearning language, one of the most basic human functions, in a memoir called My Stroke of Luck. He got most of his speech back. He wrote more books. He kept going. He did not stop until he was 103 years old. Stanley Kubrick, who clashed with Douglas frequently and legendarily during Spartacus, admitted years later, "Whatever I thought of Kirk's methods, I never questioned his physical courage. Not once. He was the most relentless man I ever worked with." Relentless is the word. Relentless. Kirk Douglas survived poverty, combat, physical injuries that would have ended careers, a helicopter crash that killed others, and a stroke that stole his voice. He outlasted all of it. He reached 103 years old, having never, at any point, decided that stopping was acceptable. That is not toughness as performance. That is toughness as identity. Permanent and unbreakable. Number 1, Audie Murphy. Most decorated American combat soldier in United States history. Medal of Honor recipient. 28 military decorations. Personally killed an estimated 240 enemy soldiers. Held off an entire company of German troops alone for over an hour from a burning tank destroyer. Wounded multiple times. Weighed 112 pounds when he enlisted. Was rejected by the Marines, the Navy, and the paratroopers before the Army finally accepted him. Audie Murphy is not on this list because he was a tough actor. He is on this list because he was the genuine article, the most lethal soldier America produced in the entire 20th century. And then he went to Hollywood and tried, as best he could, to be something softer. He never quite managed it. The camera would not let him pretend. Murphy was born in Kingston, Texas in 1925, the son of sharecroppers. He was one of 12 children. His father abandoned the family. His mother died when he was 15. He and his siblings were split up and placed in orphanages and foster homes. He had an 8th grade education. When he tried to enlist after Pearl Harbor, every branch of the military turned him down. Too young, too small, too thin. The Army finally accepted him at 17. He weighed 112 pounds and stood 5 feet 5 inches. He was assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division and deployed to North Africa, then Sicily, then the Italian mainland, then southern France, then Germany. He was a killing machine in a boy's body, and he spent 2 years proving it. Murphy appeared on the cover of Life magazine in 1945, wearing his Medal of Honor. James Cagney saw the cover and invited him to Hollywood. Studio security guards refused to believe that this soft-faced young man was the legendary Audie Murphy. That disconnect between his appearance and his reality followed him throughout his career. When he starred in A Hell and back in 1955, based on his own memoir, the studio actually toned down several of his actual battlefield achievements because test audiences refused to believe them. His real story was too extraordinary for fiction. On screen, Murphy had a stillness that no director had to create. It was already there. The stillness of a man who had seen and done things that cannot be spoken. On January 26, 1945, near Holtzwihr, France, Audie Murphy ordered his men to withdraw into the woods. Then he climbed onto a burning M10 tank destroyer, a vehicle that could have exploded at any moment, and operated its .50 caliber machine gun alone against an entire company of German infantry and 6 tanks. He was wounded. He was out of ammunition at several points and reloaded under fire. He held that position for over an hour. When asked later why he got on the burning tank, Murphy said, "They were killing my men." That was the complete explanation. There was nothing theatrical about it. There never was anything theatrical about Audie Murphy. General Walter Bedell Smith, Eisenhower's chief of staff, after reviewing Murphy's complete service record, stated, "Murphy is the kind of soldier that countries produce once in a generation, if they are lucky. His record is so extraordinary that it reads like invention. It is not invention. Every word of it is documented." Audie Murphy never wanted to be a movie star. He wanted to be a farmer. He struggled with severe PTSD for the rest of his life, sleeping with a loaded pistol, suffering violent nightmares, fighting the war every night in his sleep. He died in a plane crash in 1971 at age 45. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. The line of visitors to his grave has never stopped. Number 1 on this list. Number 1 on any list. The realest thing Hollywood ever had the privilege of putting on a screen. Honorable mention, Charles Durning, United States Army. Survived the Normandy landing on D-Day. Sole survivor of a massacre at the Battle of the Bulge. Stabbed multiple times by a German soldier in hand-to-hand combat. 3 Purple Hearts. Silver Star. Bronze Star. Did not speak about his wartime experiences for more than 50 years. When he finally did speak about D-Day, he wept. He had earned every tear. Charles Durning carried wounds through a 60-year career in Hollywood that the industry never knew about. He didn't use them to build his image. He buried them. That is its own kind of toughness. Durning was born in Highland Falls, New York in 1923. His family was large and poor. He worked as a dance hall taxi dancer as a teenager, a detail that seems incongruous until you see him move on screen, where he combined physical authority with unexpected grace. He was drafted into the Army and landed at Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944. He was one of the first wave. Of the men around him in those first minutes, nearly all were killed. Durning survived by fighting, running, and a combination of luck and ferocity that he never fully explained to anyone. Durning came to acting after decades of other work. He was already in his 40s when he began building his screen career. He brought to every role, comic or dramatic, the grounded physicality of a man who had survived things that could not be rehearsed. His body on screen communicated safety to audiences even in comedies, because there was nothing fragile about him. Directors cast him constantly. He worked until his late 80s. He never stopped. He had learned too early that stopping was not an available option. At the 2008 Screen Actors Guild Awards, Durning received the Lifetime Achievement Award. In his acceptance speech, he began to describe D-Day. He made it approximately 30 seconds into the account before he could not continue. He stood at the podium in front of the assembled industry, every major name in Hollywood, and wept. The audience was silent. Then they rose to their feet. He had never asked for their understanding. He had never traded on his service. He had simply carried it for 64 years and, on that night, set a small piece of it down. There was not a dry eye in the room, including among men who had spent their careers pretending to feel things. Durning had spent his career feeling things for real. Director Sidney Pollack, who worked with Durning several times, said, "Charlie has a quality I cannot explain technically. He makes the audience feel safe even in frightening situations." I believe it comes from the fact that he has actually been in genuinely frightening situations and survived them. It communicates. The screen cannot hide it. Charles Durning landed at Normandy, survived a massacre at the Bulge, fought hand-to-hand, and bled for his country in the worst war the world has ever seen. He never traded on it for a single role. He never mentioned it in interviews for 50 years. He just showed up, did the work, and went home. That silence is its own testimony. On a list of men defined by genuine toughness, Durning belongs, quietly, without ceremony, exactly the way he preferred. 11 men. 11 different definitions of the same word. Toughness, it turns out, does not have a single face or a single origin. It comes from coal mines and circuses, from Pacific beaches and European hedgerows, from Texas sharecropper fields and East Harlem street corners. It comes from being broken and refusing to stay broken, from being rejected and fighting anyway, from being afraid and standing up regardless. These men did not perform for the camera. The camera simply recorded what they already were. That is why their films endure. That is why, 60 and 70 years later, you can still feel something real when those faces appear on screen. If you love the real stories behind classic Hollywood, the men and women who actually lived what they portrayed, subscribe to Hollywood Memory Vault. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell.